I knew that I was misaligned, but I didn't know exactly what it is I'm after. Like you said, it's not really a linear path to go from, professional, a set career path to having a business or becoming an entrepreneur. It doesn't happen overnight. I think we're so conditioned by social norms. Everything is measured by numbers, right? Or all these predictable markers. Your values may not align with, the conventional values that the society teaches you, right? Or whatever your parents tell you when you're growing up. So it takes a lot of courage, I think, to really own up to the core values you have inside. What we think are must-haves are really not. We can live a very simple life, and we can be happy with that.
Jenny, thank you very much for joining me on Success Matters podcast. We connected really through LinkedIn. I think you commented on something, I commented back, and then we kind of reached out to each other and made a connection. And your story is one of, I suppose, the trodden path that many of us follow, but actually now you've gone off that path and are doing something substantially different to maybe what you had imagined when you were in your early 20s or so. So let's begin with that. You were born in Beijing, you said, and then moved to US, Hong Kong, London. Tell us a little bit more about that journey.
Yeah. Thanks, Sanjay, for having me here. I'm very happy to be here today. I was born in Beijing, went to school in Beijing all the way until high school. And I went to school in the US. First I did a PhD in neuroscience and pharmacology. I was very curious about the human mind. But then, I figured it really does fit the lifestyle I was looking for, which is something that's more dynamic and where I can make an impact, a real world impact. So I moved on to law school. I did a JD at Michigan Law School. And then, the story, Wall Street law firms for 10 years or so across the globe, basically. Started out in New York and then worked in Hong Kong, Singapore, Beijing. So recently I quote unquote retired. And now I'm a coach, helping executives with their career transitions or reinvention of their life. The short story.
So that's quite interesting, right? Because coming from Asian backgrounds as we do, there's a number of things that our families tend to guide us through, which is you go and get your degree, get a job like a lawyer, a doctor, an accountant, an engineer, and that kind of becomes the path. So at what point did you decide, actually, this was no longer for me, I'm going to retire from this, step back from it, and do something completely different?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I was working with Wall Street law firms, which has this upper out system. I'm not so sure if you are familiar with that. So basically,
no, what is that system?
Once you have worked for 8 to 10 years as an associate lawyer, you have the pressure of either getting promoted to partnership or you're forced out because you can't stay on as a senior attorney forever. So that's the point where I had to make the decision whether I want to be a partner or should I just leave the big law firms. And what triggered the decision to retire was I was wondering, what I can gain out of this partnership. Of course, more prestige, more money, and all that, the traditional definition of success, right? But I was also thinking about what I would lose, which would be obviously my time, my freedom, my autonomy to some extent. And the chance to build a life that I really want. Because basically you're going to use most of your time serving clients and all that. And honestly, what it felt to me was, I was renting out my brain to investment bankers and private equity funds to make them richer. If I look back, it would almost feel those years didn't exist. So that's the point where I really started thinking, what do I really want and how do I define success for myself instead of the traditional metrics. Long story short, I decided that I didn't want to go on and become a partner at a law firm. I took basically 3 years off, I think, before I found my new passion in coaching.
Right. Was that quite a difficult step to take, to say, I'm leaving all of that behind to do something different? Or, as you said, was that draw? Because you talked about, okay, this is what I might gain, but this is what I might lose. Was that kind of win-loss equation so strong that there was a no-brainer? I'm not going into partnership. I'm doing something completely different.
Um, I guess yes and no. I actually knew that I was never really going to stay in law firms for very long because, I know what I signed up for and I know what my values really are. So I knew there was going to be a day where I have to step off and do something else. But even with that clarity, it was very difficult. Because it's very human, right? I think we're hardwired to chase security or success. It's one thing to know that you don't want prestige or money or financial security. It's another to really let go when the writing falls off your eyes. So I remember, it took me probably quite a few years to make that decision. Maybe at year 5, I would be like, okay, maybe a few years more. And then at the year 8 mark, I'm like, well, maybe 2 more years. It was really until the end of the 10th year, I think, where I was forced to make that decision. Like I was called into meetings with senior management, talking about my track. I was kind of pressured to, do things that would give them a signal that this is really what I want. And then they would even ask me, hey, do you want to start generating clients? We'll have a trial for 2 years and we'll see if you can make that sort of revenue by the end of 2 years. That's the point where I was like, okay, I can't pretend anymore. I can't pretend that I'm living a life that is aligned with my inner values. So yeah,
Right.
it was a long process and it wasn't easy.
And I'm glad to share that, because I think there's lots of people who see, I don't know, Instagram, there's people on LinkedIn saying, quit your job and start this business, and it all looks great on the surface, but there's a lot of turmoil, I suppose, that goes on inside you, right? And you said about being aligned to your values. What are your values then? What was it out of the values that really drew you to do what you do today?
Yeah. Good question. To be honest, I wasn't clear when I left the law firm. I knew that I was misaligned, but I didn't really know exactly what it is I'm after. Like you said, it's not really a linear path to go from, professional, a set career path to having a business or becoming an entrepreneur. It doesn't happen overnight. So it took me a while. I think what I did was I didn't start something new right away. I just took some time off. I went to live in London, enrolled myself in cello courses, and then I went trekking in Nepal. I actually ended up living in Nepal for a couple of years, just to do spiritual retreats, just have space for myself. And that's when the clarity really came in terms of my inner values. And I figured out, what's really important for me is spirituality, freedom. I think freedom would include many things: financial freedom, authenticity, also autonomy, freedom of time. I get to do whatever I want. I get to travel whenever I want. They're important to me. Um, and also, I think another thing that I didn't know before, which is making an impact, not like getting famous or anything, but really to help people to the extent I can with my own skills and experience, because I feel like that's what makes life fulfilling. instead of just another number in the bank account. So that's something that I realized in my post retirement years. And that's how coaching came into mind. And I thought it was a good idea because it would align with all these values that I was describing for you.
Right. And you now live in Nepal, right? You live in an area of Kathmandu. How's the contrast been between living in London or New York or Beijing, Singapore, to living now in Kathmandu in Nepal?
Oh, it's a sharp contrast. I'm sure you can imagine. Because all my life up to this point, I've been living in big cities, basically financial hubs. And I'm very used to the fast-paced, pretty stressful environment. And I think, you become numb after a while. You don't notice the anxiety in the air. But when I came to Nepal, I was actually shocked by how relaxed people are. This is not a rich country. Things can be pretty rough for people. But they're just quite simple and happy. You see smiles all the time.
Mhm.
And they're just happy with what they have and they miss you. So it really got me thinking, what is it that we really need to be happy or be sufficient? Um, and that's, I think, kind of made me realize what we think are must-haves are really not. We can live a very simple life, um, and we can be happy with that. So that's also a lesson for me in the past few years.
Right. And when we were preparing for this, you also told me about your spirituality and how that's very important to you. So is much of what you um, talk about and the way of coaching, is that based around your Buddhist spirituality?
Yeah, exactly. So I wasn't really born a Buddhist or I don't even really have any religious background. I think it was around the time when I started working as a lawyer, I ran into some books, written by a Tibetan Buddhist master. Um, and somehow it just really shifted the way I look at things. It really shook the intellectual frameworks that I had at the time. And it just made sense. And later on, I think the conditions just emerged that I became his pretty close student. So I was studying and practicing under his guidance for the last 10 years or so. Um, and I don't really see Buddhism as a religion. It really is about seeking the truth. To me, it's about really relating to ourselves and others and the world in a different way, a more honest way. And it's about seeing this good. And that really helped me, put things in perspective. And it's basically the North Star for me. And I also integrate this identity of me into my coaching. I integrate the Buddhist wisdom and meditation methods into the coaching, so that people can also acquire the sort of clarity that would allow them to realign with their values or make decisions or whatnot. So it's not really something that's out there. It's something that we can apply to our daily lives, and in my own coaching work as well.
Right. Yeah. And I suppose many kind of, particularly the Eastern religions, it's more of the way of life. It's kind of how you live your life rather than being a series of scriptures or books that you necessarily follow, although it's kind of written in there, if that makes sense. It makes sense to me when I say it that way, but maybe it doesn't make sense to others. Did the cello come with you to Nepal?
Um, yeah, I actually flew it from London back to Hong Kong and then to Nepal with me. So I practice cello once a day for about half an hour, an hour. It's also another anchor, that's where I create the space to connect with myself through music, which I think is
Hmm.
also part of spirituality, to be honest. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's, music can move people. And I'm certainly one of those people where I can listen to something, whatever it is, and it can trigger so many emotions in me. And I'm known to start having tears in my eyes when I hear a piece of music that has some sort of meaning or thing to me. So it's very, very much for me a spiritual piece as well as to something to listen to. It's got a lot of depth to it.
Yeah. And I think, also the practice itself, right? Because when you practice an instrument, the whole process, I would see it as a spiritual journey as well, because you go through all these mental blocks, you go through, difficulties, obstacles, and the way you relate to that and to the instrument itself is also a spiritual journey to me. Like
Mm.
pretty much everything else in life.
Yeah, yes. And so for me, the spiritual journey in some regards has been this podcast because success matters. It was born out of a thought that you and I have commercial backgrounds, right? You were being offered a partnership, which really meant you were going to become a salesperson for that for law firm, and the expectation would you would become like a rainmaker. You'd be the person bringing in the clients, bringing in the money. I've worked in a sales background for a long, long time, and so success becomes measured by really your commercial impact, and that almost starts to define you as a whole. But there's a whole other side of what success means, which we've just touched on, things like the spirituality and being connected and serving others. And so for me, this has been a bit of a spiritual journey because I have conversations with people about what success means to them. And very, very few say it's about the money in my bank account or it's about the house. It's generally about making the world a better place, whether it's one interaction or multiple interactions. How can I make the world a better place? So it touches me as well in these conversations.
Yeah, because that's not something that people talk about, right? We never learn those things in school. I think we're so conditioned by social norms. And we thinking, we all need to get on some sort of linear career path, fit everything into a tidy box. Everything is measured by numbers, right? Or all these predictable markers. And I think it's really good work to talk about success or our lives in a non-traditional way, just to get up the box, right? I think that's really good work that you're doing.
Yeah, thank you. So as this is called Success Matters and you've been on a journey, what would you say success means to you now?
Um, I would define success for myself as um aligning my external life with my internal values. It sounds simple, but it's extremely difficult because your values may not align with, the conventional values that the society teaches you, right? Or whatever your parents tell you when you're growing up. So it takes a lot of courage, I think, to really own up to the core values you have inside. Um, and I think it's probably a lifetime's journey to really align your external life with those core values.
Yeah. Do you have an example of one where, there's a core value you've got that doesn't necessarily align with what you grew up with, as your parents were saying, or, people around you were saying, this is what you should be valuing?
Um, well, for example, this idea of having a full-time job, a shiny title. I think I pretty much, growing up as an Asian kid with typical Asian parents, you're taught, oh, you need to become a doctor or a lawyer or some sort of, very well-defined role on a preset path, right? Okay, you finish school, you start as a junior lawyer, you become a partner, and eventually you're on pension, whatever. Um, and then that's just not what really aligns with what I value, which is freedom, I think, number one for myself. Like, for example, I had the experience of getting scolded as a junior lawyer by my boss because I didn't answer a call at 4 a.m. He actually said, it's okay if you go to sleep, but you need to leave your phone on. Like you can't mute your phone. So whenever a client or your boss calls you, you need to answer. And that just becomes the norm, a junior lawyer or a lawyer at a big law firm, you don't have your own time. Nobody respects your privacy. Nobody respects the boundary. So that really clashes with my value of autonomy and freedom. And I finally tasted freedom after I left that system. But I think it takes tremendous courage, right, to really get out of that system because everything is intertwined. Insurance, for example, house insurance. It took me a long time to figure that out after I left the system. Financial security, prestige, how people look at you, your social status, the way your friends used to relate with you. Everything is going to change when you get out of the system. So, um, I got a little scattered, but back to your question. I think the example for me would be, a set path versus freedom.
Yeah, yeah, indeed. And just your story about answering the phone at 4 a.m. A good friend of mine was a partner in a London law firm, and he'd often sleep overnight at work. They had the sleep pods, they had the areas so you could work almost 24/7, which when you stop and think about it, that's pretty crazy, right? But that is the world that city-based lawyers work in. Those big firms, that's what you do. Mm-hmm. So I have a tradition in my podcast where I ask a previous guest for a question for my next guest. My last guest asked, we talk about superpowers and what are our superpowers, but what is your kryptonite? So Superman had his superpowers, but there was kryptonite took away, or was that thing that weakened him. So what is your kryptonite?
I would say fear, actually.
Beer.
Fear.
Oh, fear. Okay. I heard beer. I thought, okay.
Yeah. I think, I would kind of relate this to the evolutionary history, right? We're wired in a way that we react to situations out of fear. I think in the Stone Age, it protected us from danger, and we had to react very fast. So there's no time for your brain to rationalize things. You have to react right away. That's the flight or flight reaction. And I think for me, that sort of fear, which is hardwired in our brain, is the biggest obstacle to a lot of things. We were talking about redefining success, for example, or creating a path for yourself or live on your own terms. But a lot of times, even if we have the clarity and the courage and all the skills to do that, fear would almost always get in the way. And it's not so easy to sort of get rid of fear because it's just there. So it requires a lot of, I think, awareness to live with that fear and not be controlled by it. So I would say, yeah, fear.
I think that's true for most people, actually. You're right. Fear is the thing that holds people back. So that becomes their kryptonite, right? Fear of rejection, fear of what others will say, fear of failure, fear of this, fear of that. That's the thing that stops people doing what they might be dreaming about, but actually never kind of ever get there. So that's an interesting answer. Do you have a question for my next guest?
I would like to ask, when you redefine success, what would be the method you would use to decide how you reinvent your life?
Okay, what would be the method you would use to decide how to reinvent your life? Okay, yeah, that's interesting. And you yourself have been on this journey, right? So you've reinvented your life. Would you say you're kind of at that point now where have that clarity of what your future direction in life looks like, or is that still a work in progress?
I would say it's always a work in progress. Everything is evolving all the time. I think, certainty or stability is really an illusion to me. So I can say, yes, I find my direction for now, but I really don't know where I'm going to be in 5-10 years. It's funny when you
Yeah.
ask me this question. I just remember this scenario where a few years back, when I was considering starting a coaching business, one of my very blunt but well-intentioned friend said, no one's ever going to hire you again. Look at your resume. You're clearly pretty talented, but you don't know what you want to do. At
Yes.
that point, I didn't know how to respond because, he sounded like what people would say, in the main
Hmm.
society. But then I really thought, life is not linear. Everything is evolving with time. And if we're going to be true to ourselves, we need to reevaluate and look at our situation constantly and just, make adjustment. Um, and it's so interesting also at this time and age where AI is really emerging. And we're talking about,
Mm.
changes on a quarterly basis. For example, I think the way AI integrates into our life is different from 3 months ago, right? We're not even talking about
Yeah.
years. And things are inherently uncertain. There's no such thing as job security or predictable future anymore. We don't know. We're pretty much operating in a black box, I would say. So I think it's very important to embrace change and evolve with that and stay true to ourselves. So I would definitely say everything is work in progress. Nothing is set.
Yeah. The only certainty is uncertainty, I suppose, right? That's the thing. Mm. That's cool. How would you, if you've bumped into that friend now, or maybe you do still speak to that friend, what would your answer be to them now when they say no one's going to hire you again?
Well, I don't need anyone to hire me because, I can live on my own terms. Nobody gets to tell me what life should like or come up with a standard predictable timeline for my life, right? Someone can have, I don't know, 3 to 4 different careers, which may become the norm going forward anyway. There's no such thing as
Yeah.
staying at one place forever and retire from the same company. I don't think it's going to happen really for the younger generation.
Mm. Yeah, I think so too. That portfolio career, some might call it, or the kind of gig economy will doing different jobs at different times and getting paid according to what you're doing at that time. That's probably the future direction for work overall. So we're nearing the top of our time now, Jay. What's if people want to find out more about you or to get in contact with you, what's the best way for them to do so?
They can find me on my websites. And also I'm on LinkedIn and Substack. I can provide the links to you so that people can easily find them in the description.
Okay, that'd be great. We'll add that to the description of the podcast where it gets published. So thank you very much for taking part in Success Matters, Jen. It's been a very interesting conversation. To go from Beijing to US to Singapore, London, New York to Nepal now, and landing, finalizing in Nepal. That's quite a journey to have been on, and to step off that beaten path that we all, generally follow, particularly within Asian families. That's kind of the path that you're told to follow. So, yeah, it's been very interesting to kind of see how things have changed for you.
Thank you, Sanjay. I really enjoyed our conversation.
To find your success, contact me at info@successmatterscoaching.com. That's info@successmatterscoaching.com.